Just want to say we're excited to have Dr. Lee join us for a live webinar today. Dr. Inyeop Lee is an assistant professor of politics and history at Spring Arbor University in Michigan. He recently co-wrote a book entitled Politics in North and South Korea, Political Development, Economy, and Foreign Relations, published this year. It's very new and it's very timely. Dr. Inyeop Lee is originally from South Korea and has earned 2 master's degrees from Seoul National University, the top university in Korea, and George Washington University. He finished his doctoral dissertation on the U.S. foreign policy towards North Korea at the University of Georgia. And his research interest is East Asian security and politics and U.S. foreign policy. And he teaches various courses in international relations, comparative politics, and American government. And so we just feel very, very honored to have such a specialist. And not only is he a specialist in this area, but he is also a dear friend of Hyun and Ma Ni. And so I just feel very blessed that he has said yes to our time. We so appreciate you taking this time to talk with our Mennonite community to give us kind of an overview of what is really happening. This time that we have, we've kind of divided into 2 sections. The first half of our time will be about history, kind of a background of Korea. Why, the history of division, North Korea, the Korean War, and also what has been happening with the nuclear weapons, and what are some of the previous diplomatic efforts, and why was it unsuccessful. So we're going to look at the first half of our time will be Korean history, and then we will give our participants some time for Q&A after he gives that overview of history. And in the second session, he will focus on kind of this negotiation, the most recent negotiation between Kim Jong-un and Trump, and what does this mean? There was Inter-Korea Summit that happened on April 27th. How do we understand the upcoming U.S.-North Korea Summit meeting on June 12th? So, and at the end, we like to close our time of how do we as peacemakers, how should we understand and what can we do about what is happening, and take some questions and answers. So I hope that's clear for everyone, and we will try our best to finish everything by 9 o'clock. So with no further ado, Dr. Lee, we are so honored that you are giving us this time to give us some history of the division in Korea. What happened and how did it build up to the Korean War? And why has there been such a long decade of confrontation in the in the Korean Peninsula?
Just a little bit about myself. Sue had a great introduction of myself. I'm originally from South Korea. I'm a Christian, and I was raised as an evangelical Christian. And I was in the university at the end of 1990s. And at that time, we had serious famine in North Korea. So I was involved with some fundraising to support North Korean people. And at that time, 1997, we also had a financial crisis, Asian financial crisis, and some difficulty in South Korean economy. And South Korean churches were also declining in terms of number and their influence in our society. So we were talking about a lot of national issues, what will be the future of our country, what is the meaning of the division and confrontation in our country, the problem in the South and problem in the North. And some people began to read the Bible and trying to discuss issue from Christian perspective. One of the important inspiration was the book of prophets in Old Testament, like book of Isaiah, talking about northern Israel and southern Judea divided and just falling into pieces and confrontation surrounded by powerful nations and losing their faith. Some of us were in South Korea were thinking that it is very much similar to the situation of Korean Peninsula. And Book of Ezekiel, chapter 37, verse 17, joining two sticks together into one. Many people got inspiration from that Bible verses that one day God will lead us into one nation again, ending the confrontation and pursuing peace and reconciliation. So I was the university student at that time, and I began to think about what I'm going to do for my future. And I was thinking like I have to do something for the peace and reconciliation and unification of my country. So I decided to study international relations, and I came to the United States and doing my degrees. And I was raised as Presbyterian Christian and an evangelical Christian. And I came here and I got some opportunity to know about Mennonite Christians. How many of you are somehow related to Mennonite Christianity? Raise your hands. Great, right? So there's not so many Mennonite churches in Korea, in South Korea. So it is something new, and I was a little tired of very nationalistic or militaristic Christianity in South Korea, like conservative Christianity in the United States. And Mennonite Christianity, like their emphasis in community, peace, and reconciliation were really something new, refreshing to me and my wife. And I got to, we were connected to some people like Jubilee partners. I want to honor you, Don and Caroline, you are here. Like we were very close to Jubilee partners in Commerce, Georgia. I was doing my doctorate degree at University of Georgia. So we were visiting them very often on Sunday night, and we were connecting with them and learn from them their dedication for peace and reconciliation. Now I'm living in Michigan, southern Michigan. I'm very close to Goshen. And one of the participants are from Goshen, and we visited Goshen University sometimes, and I also had a chance to speak about North Korean issue in Goshen College. And now I'm teaching in Methodist University, Christian University, so I'm a little bit of everything, like Presbyterian, and I was also influenced by Full Gospel movement in South Korea. My wife is actually from Full Gospel Church, and I'm working in Methodist Church, Methodist University, and I'm really fascinated by Mennonite and their tradition. So we are part of one big happy family. Yeah, so anyway, that is a little bit of my introduction. And the first question, what happened to Korea and why Korea was divided? Again, it will take forever, but I will be very brief. When I'm asking the question, like, how come Korea was divided? Many of the American people will say, because of the Korean War, which is not true, because it is not like Korean War divided the country, but Korean War is actually the consequence of division. Of course, North Korea invaded the South, so that means two countries were already divided before the Korean War. So how come those two countries began to separate regimes? Of course, Korean Peninsula, we have thousands of history, and we have like last dynasty, which is Joseon dynasty. Of course, there's one Korea rather than two Korea. At the end of Joseon dynasty, it was colonized by Japanese empire. Of course, Japan started the Pacific War. And at the end of Pacific War, of course, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs in Japan, and Japan surrendered. And the Allied forces like Soviet Union, USSR, and United States were coming to the Korean Peninsula to disarm the Japanese military stationed in Korea. And of course, United States were calculating, and they didn't have a well-established blueprint, but they were afraid of Soviet Union taking too much in Asia. So, like Lieutenant Colonel, whose name is Dean Rusk, who later became the Secretary of State, he was in the military, and he was coming up with some idea of dividing the Korean peninsula in half. He was basically drawing the line in the middle of the peninsula, which is 38th parallel. And interestingly, he suggested, and USSR accepted it. Of course, he didn't consulted Korean people whether they like it or not. So basically, it was a great power decision to divide Korean Peninsula without the wishes of Korean people, who of course wanted to have an independent and unified country after their liberation from Japan. So, so who was divided in Europe after World War II? It was Germany, of course, East Germany and West Germany. Who started the war in Europe, World War II? It was Germany. So German people accepted it as some kinds of punishment. Who started the war in Asia, Pacific War? It was Japan, right? Who became a divided country? Korea. So Korea was victimized by Japan, but it was victimized again by great power rivalry and their balance of power consideration. So, United States came in, Soviet Union came in. They established two different regimes in the northern side and southern side according to their own image. So that means South Korea became capitalist, pro-American country. North Korea became communist, pro-Soviet country. So of course, it was very unnatural, artificial process because it used to be one country and everybody were mixed together. Like there were Christians and non-Christians, capitalists and socialists and communists, and landowners and poor people and nationalists and all kinds of different people in the entire peninsula. But once the line was drawn between the two, there was massive relocation of population, especially in the north. Landowners, Christians, and rightists, they were heavily persecuted by northern regime, communist regime. Vice versa, in the south, communists and socialists were heavily persecuted by U.S. Forces stationed in South Korea and South Korean government. So a lot of people lost their homes and their lands and their churches and their family members, and a lot of massacres and killings, and that was actually creating a lot of hatred between the two, and that triggered the Korean War. Especially Kim Il-sung, he was making wrong calculation. He believed that he can easily unify the country before any of the country like United States intervened or UN intervention. And he also believed that South Korean people will be welcoming them. But he was wrong. A lot of people in South Korea were somebody from North Korea, and they were anti-communist, and they were also like very critical about like communism and strong like rightist like regimes, and a lot of Christians are there in the South. So they were fighting against the North. So and the United States, in the name of UN, they intervened very fast. So Korean War started. One of the important memories of Korean War is in North Korea is North Korea had huge number of casualty, mostly because of massive U.S. bombing. So of course, the greatest way to reduce your casualty in your military is bombing them, right? So United States was introducing a lot of like bombing operation in the north. And for example, 80% of infrastructure and 50% of North Korean cities were destroyed. And in Pyongyang, capital city only, they had 428,000 bombs dropped. And at one moment, a pilot was flying to bomb Pyongyang, and they were reporting that he was reporting back to the control center that there's no more targets. So it is totally flattened. So what was the memory of Korean War according to North Korean people? Almost like 20% of their population decimated by U.S. bombing. Of course, they are the one who started the war, but do they deserve to die in that way, or the children and like children and women and civilians? Like, of course, the Korean War is marked with a heavy civilian casualty. There's no like distinction between civilians and like military personnel in that kind of all-out war for 3 years. So a lot of tragedy. So North Korean memory of the Korean War is very very much like a living hell. Like they had total destruction, and of course, North Korean regime taught them that it is South Korea and the United States who invaded North Korea for the first time, and they were fighting back, which is not actually true. But most of North Korean people learned that in that way. Is there any movies in the United States like depicting Korean War? Is there any famous movies and TV shows? I don't think so. So oftentimes, I mean, if you're old, you remember MASH, right? Yeah. But other than that, I mean, you don't have a lot of movies. So oftentimes, Korean War is described as forgotten war in the United States. Like World War II, glorious victory, and like Vietnam War, the disaster. The Korean War, they didn't win and they didn't defeat it. So it was not something great and it was not extremely horrible. So somehow, like, so it was not the strongest memory of the United States, American people. But how about North Korean people? Do they remember the Korean War? I mean, almost like 20% of the population killed. That means every family lost somebody, like in the war. So again, the brainwashing in North Korea, the education, the hatred, they formulated very strong anti-American sentiment in the Korean War. So that was brief introduction to the first question. The answer to the first question.
Now, the second question that we wanted to ask was, why did North Korea develop nuclear weapons and how threatening is that?
Right. So I don't want to be too pro North Korea or like too much sympathetic to North Korea. So I want to be objective here. Is there anybody from CIA here today? No, I don't think so. Okay. North Korea, they have their version of story. Of course, United States have your version of story about North Korea, of course. Which country had nuclear weapons in the Korean Peninsula during the Cold War period between 1957 and 1991? During the during the Cold War period in Korean Peninsula, it is actually South Korea rather than North Korea. How come? The United States introduced nuclear weapon to Korean Peninsula after the war, which was actually a violation of the truce agreement. And the United States also considered a use of nuclear weapons during the Korean War. General MacArthur was, it is a long story, but again, Chinese forces intervened and there was tug of war, and he couldn't actually deal with so many huge population, human wave tactic from Chinese forces. And he was actually considering to use nuclear weapons against the North and Chinese forces. Of course, he was fired by President Truman, who was worrying about World War III. But North Korea remembered the memory of the atomic bomb dropped in Japan, and also the fear of the United States dropping atomic bombs in their own territory during the Korean War. And of course, again, from 1957 or 1958, United States, US forces stationed in South Korea introduced nuclear weapons. Interestingly, I was in South Korea and I didn't know that. Most of South Korean people didn't even know that there's nuclear weapons existing in South Korea. So from South Korean and US perspective, of course, it is defensive weapon preparing for another Korean War initiated by the North. To stop North Korea from starting another war, it is some kind of deterrence or containment policy. From North Korean perspective, there is some possibility of United States using it against them. So North Korea was living under the fear of nuclear wars during the Cold War period. So South Korea and North Korea, and U.S. forces stationed in South Korea were eyeball to eyeball for almost half a century. So North Korea was very much heavily militarized society because it was actually facing the threat from the most powerful country in the world, the United States. So for example, I was in South Korea. I did my military service for 2 years. Like everybody else in male, every male in South Korea, they have to serve like 2 years in the military. My father's generation, they served 3 years. In North Korea, they served 10 years. Most of males and even females are serving that long. So it is one of the heavily militarized society. And North Korea is number 4 in armed personnel, after China, India, and the United States. But of course, compared to 3 countries who has large population, North Korea is a tiny country in terms of population and size. That means huge, substantial portion of their population are serving in the military. So in the South, of course, they had annual military exercises. Like for example, like War Eagle or Key Reserve. Those are joint military exercises between United States, U.S. forces and South Korean forces. At least somehow like 200,000 soldiers are involved in that training, like South Korean military and U.S. military. Of course, you have thousands of U.S. military stationed in South Korea, and some hundred thousands of South Korean soldiers are involved in that training. So that is one of the largest military exercises in the world. Of course, it is targeting North Korea. Again, from South Korea and U.S. perspective, it is the training to defend South Korea and the United States. From North Korean perspective, it might be turning into some kinds of invasion to North Korea if things are getting bad, right? So North Korea was paranoid about the threat. Of course, U.S. official position, we have no intention to invade North Korea or attack North Korea. Can North Korea really believe that? It will be a little foolish if they are totally comfortable about like that kinds of any possibility of North Korea, the war. So they have to be prepared. So somehow Korean Peninsula is one of the heavily militarized society in both sides. At the same time, North Korea became like very much monolithic regime using the external pressure, like the security threat, and like there are some regions North Korea became much more active in pursuing nuclear weapons, nuclear development in 1990s. First, there was serious dramatic shift in balance of power between South and the North. For example, 60s and 70s, North Korean economy was really okay. It was even better than South Korea. Not so many people actually know that. Socialist countries were much more successful in initial stage of economic development. But 70s, South Korea and North Korea have some kinds of economic parity. And 1980s, South Korean economy was flying. Like it was achieving rapid economic development. But 80s and 90s, North Korean economy was either stagnant and declining. Especially 1990s, what was happening? The collapsing down of the Cold War system and communist allies. So North Korea was involved with some kinds of barter trade with their communist comrades, like Eastern European country and communist China and communist Soviet Union. And most of their allies are gone, collapsing down. So North Korea was losing any of the trading partner. Of course, they have serious lack in energies. Like they don't have oil, but Soviet Union is not supporting them anymore. And of course, they are pretty much isolated. South Korea normalized the relationship with like Soviet Union and later Russia. South Korea also normalized the relationship with communist China, but North Korea couldn't get cross recognition by United States and Japan, their former enemy. So what does that mean? North Korea is pretty much isolated economically, diplomatically, and they have some serious famine. And while South Korea developed into much more democratic country in 1980s, and there was democratic movement, 1970s and 80s, South Korea was under military dictatorship. So again, most of the people in the United States are thinking North Korea is always bad, South Korea is always good, which is not necessarily true. South Korea was pretty authoritarian dictatorship in 70s and 90s. And so did North Korea in 70s and 80s. But interestingly, South Korea became much more democratic and economically developed and much more globalized and internationalized middle power. So North Korea feel really threatened. In 1991, that was the moment Cold War is collapsing down. And of course, 1991, South Korean president and United States declared that there's no more nuclear weapons in the South. That means, of course, they used to have nuclear weapons in the South. Why United States withdrew nuclear weapons from the South at the moment of 1991? First, they developed ICBM. So it doesn't matter whether nuclear weapons are stationed in South Korea or in Guam or somewhere else. They can reach North Korean target in some minutes. At the same time, they wanted to pressure North Korea for denuclearization because they got some intelligence that North Korea is somehow developing nuclear facility in 1980s and 1990s. So they wanted to pressure North Korea to denuclearize it at the moment of 1991. So somehow, like again, shifting balance of power, isolation of North Korea, and their memory of the Korean War and the possibility of nuclear war, that all contributed to their pursuit of nuclear weapons, because I mean, they cannot compete United States in terms of conventional weapons capability, right? They don't have economic capability to fundraise such a militarization. So again, developing nuclear weapon is not an ethical decision, of course. It is violation of international laws. But from North Korean perspective, it is very much economical, and it is a fantastic idea to bridge the gap in their weapons capability and to guarantee their regime's survival. So somehow it is bad decision, but it is not necessarily a mad decision. It is not a crazy decision, because I mean, there's some value in being a realist in some cases, because from the realist perspective, North Korean decision is not an outlier or crazy decision. It is somehow one of the most cost-efficient way to guarantee your survival, having nuclear weapons. Of course, there is some consequences. You might be surviving as a country, but you will be still under economic sanctions, diplomatically isolated. You will never have some economic reforms and economic development like China or Vietnam. So there is a dilemma. So North Korea might also want to negotiate with the United States using nuclear weapons as their bargaining chip. Of course, nuclear weapons development requires nuclear energy development. So, of course, North Korea doesn't have oil. So nuclear energy development is also very beneficial for their supply of electricity. So it has multiple purposes and benefits. The question is whether they will be negotiating with the United States and giving up, exchange nuclear weapons with a peace treaty and diplomatic negotiation, and pursue the path of China or Vietnam.
Well, that's fascinating. I especially when you said it's a bad decision but not a mad decision, understanding where their history and their strategy of wanting to enter into a safe place after their traumatic event that they have encountered. So I know that there have been different previous diplomatic efforts that have been made. Why was it unsuccessful? Because many times people say it's North Korea broke it, and therefore, we can't trust them with this effort this time. Right. It's the same thing, nothing new. Nothing new is kind of how the news is portraying it. So tell us why the previous diplomatic efforts were unsuccessful.
Yeah, I was writing my dissertation on that topic, so I can take you forever. I can talk about days and nights on that.
Sorry, but you only have like 3 minutes, okay?
Yeah. Okay. How about 10 minutes? So 1991, again, that was an important juncture of Korean Peninsula when the Cold War was collapsing down. So United States and South Korea actually had an opportunity to solve this issue in 1991, because North Korea was almost like begging for negotiation, because they were thinking about some guarantee for their survival. So on one hand, they have an option of nuclear weapons development. On the other hand, they were thinking like, if we normalize the relationship and United States guarantee our survival, maybe we will be reforming. But there was some negotiation. 1992, there was some decision by the United States to cancel joint military exercises in 1992, team spirit military exercises. So some negotiation was going on. And North Korea was even saying that they are not objecting to US troops stationed in the Korean Peninsula, even after the unification, which is something very interesting. However, the negotiation became unsuccessful because, first, some of the hawkish officials in the United States, politicians, they don't want to trust North Korea, and they were very skeptical about North Korea. Especially, they believe that the collapsing down of North Korea is impending, like all the Eastern European countries or Soviet Union. So they're thinking like, why would compensate their bad behavior when they're about to be collapsing down? Like, we don't want to negotiate with North Korea that is about to fail. So they were uninterested in negotiation with North Korea, and they don't want to guarantee North Korean survival. And North Korea was relatively angry, and they were like trying to withdraw their membership from NPT, which is Non-Proliferation Treaty, banning nuclear weapons. So they became much more straightforward about their intention to develop nuclear weapons. And of course, in 1993, Bill Clinton was the president, and he was considering many options. And when the confrontation between the two, nuclear crisis, became much more intensified, and Bill Clinton was even having a simulation, and he was really shocked by the results. Probably some million people will be killed right after the breakout of Second Korean War, even without nuclear weapons. With conventional weapons, like most of people in South Korea, most of people in Seoul will be killed in some days and all that. So some confrontation and some tensions, and all of a sudden, 1994, former President Carter visited North Korea, and he was he was having a conversation with Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea, and they confirmed that nobody actually want to start the war. So the negotiation resumed with the diplomatic mission to Pyongyang by President Carter. And Bill Clinton administration was successful in achieving Geneva Agreement in 1994. Basically, it is freezing North Korean nuclear reactor, and United States is promising to build a light water reactor to replace graphite moderate reactor, which is much easier to build nuclear weapons. So light water reactor that United States and South Korea and Japan and other countries are going to build is much more difficult to build to use nuclear weapons development. At the same time, until the construction of nuclear reactor, alternative nuclear reactor, Bill Clinton administration promised they are going to provide heavy fuel oil to compensate their loss in electricity production in the nuclear facility. Of course, North Korea guaranteed to freeze their nuclear facility, and eventually they promised they're going to pursue diplomatic normalization and peace treaty and denuclearization of North Korea. So sounds very familiar, like that is something we are talking about today, right? But 1994, they already tried that. The problem is it was October 1994, and November you had midterm election. Remember, like Newt Gingrich contract with America? Who is old enough to remember that? Like 1994, right? So the Republican Party actually took control of both houses. Of course, they were skeptical about Geneva Agreement from the first place. They didn't like Bill Clinton trying to negotiate with North Korea because, again, North Korea is a country that it will be collapsed in the near future. So why you are compensating their bad behavior? Like they are axis of evil, like they are evil country, human rights abusers, and all that, right? So in Congress, Republican Party, of course, they didn't respect Geneva Agreement. So they were cutting the funding for heavy fuel oil. And of course, there was no light water reactor constructed by Bill Clinton administration. And he even had a hard time securing funding to keep up with the heavy oil shipment to North Korea. And of course, there is no progress in terms of diplomatic normalization and peace treaty at all, because basically most of US politicians are waiting for North Korea to be collapsed down, right? So North Korea was losing their patience. They were testing missiles in 1998. And interestingly, Kim Dae-jung, the new president, the liberal president, came in. Like he was almost like first opposition leader who became a president after 1961. So he became a president in 1997. And of course, the famous Sunshine Policy started by Kim Dae-jung.
And this is South Korean president, right?
South Korean president Kim Dae-jung, right? So of course, he got Nobel Peace Prize later. But Bill Clinton and Kim Dae-jung had much better chemistry. They were pursuing some of the diplomacy again toward North Korea. So some positive momentum. So year 2000, Vice Marshal Cho Myung-lo, he's a North Korean military leader working for Kim Jong-il. he actually visited White House, and he was having some kind of quasi-summit meeting with Bill Clinton, and they are talking about normalization, diplomatic normalization, and peace treaty, and denuclearization. Again, the same thing. They already talk about that. And President Clinton dispatched Secretary of State Madeleine Albright to North Korea. So Albright having a conversation, she was toasting with Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-il promising no more nuclear, no more missile tests. Of course, it is long before their nuclear tests. So like a lot of positive momentum, and all of a sudden, you have presidential election. And after recounting, President George W. Bush became the winner. And of course, he didn't like what Bill Clinton was doing. His policy is ABC, anything but Clinton, right? So of course, he doesn't have any intention to keep up with Geneva Agreement, which will be giving credits to Bill Clinton. So he was basically very hawkish to North Korea. He was very skeptical about Kim Jong-il and all that. So at the end of his term, Clinton was having a plan to visit North Korea and visit Pyongyang, and he didn't have time, and he was a lame duck president, and the new president didn't like it, so he was giving up his efforts. So again, another lost opportunity. I should be relatively brief. So again, 2002, there is second nuclear crisis under President Bush, and they were accusing North Korea having HEU program, highly enriched uranium program. It is complex story. So basically, United States stopped shipment of heavy fuel oil to North Korea, which is the only thing respected in the name of Geneva Agreement. So Geneva Agreement basically was falling apart, and North Korea nullified it as a reaction to the decision from the United States. So again, North Korea was much more like unfreezing their fuel rods and nuclear developments. So at least between 1994 to 2002, North Korean facility was frozen. But again, thanks to the decision, they were actively pursuing nuclear program again from 2002. Of course, there is some discussion, debate, who broke the Geneva Agreement. Both sides are accusing each other. Anyway, 2005, they started some kind of negotiation because President Bush became less and less popular with the Iraqi turmoil, and he was losing his midterm election 2006. And at the same time, China and South Korea, the new president, Roh Moo-hyun, was another successor of Sunshine Policy. So they were pursuing some mediation diplomacy, which is again very similar to what was happening today. So in the end, fixed party talk started, and they were achieving some success. But 2008, President Bush was again becoming a lame duck president, and hawkish leaders in the United States were asking for more. I mean, there's very easy way to torpedo negotiation. Basically, you are asking something unacceptable to North Korea. Basically, they were asking special inspection, unlimited special inspection of North Korean territory. That means, inspectors will visit any place in North Korea, any suspected place, which is unacceptable to any independent country, right? So North Korea said no, and the negotiation ended. Another factor is in North Korea, Kim Jong-il, North Korean leader, he had a stroke. So he was much more pursuing leadership succession to his own son, Kim Jong-un, rather than negotiation. He was losing his momentum. At the same time, in South Korea, we have Lee Myung-bak, as a new president, who is again conservative, president who is waiting for North Korea to collapse down. So that was end of Sunshine Policy. So that was the end of the last efforts. So again, what made it very difficult? First, lack of understanding toward each other, gap in perception, their perception of nuclear issue. From North Korean perception, it is their survival issue and security issue, and they are like a small country surrounded by a powerful country. From US perspective, it is almost like North Korea is a criminal and I'm a global police force. So you have to surrender your weapons and we will be punishing you if you are not doing the right thing, kinds of attitudes. So different gap, different understanding of the issue. Of course, United States will not have some unwillingness to acknowledge North Korea's security issue from the United States, because we are the good guy, they are the bad guy. They are like a criminal, right? We don't want to compensate their bad behavior. And of course, they are fearful toward each other, especially North Korea afraid of being cheated by the United States. What if I give them nuclear weapons and United States invade us, like United States invaded Iraq, or supporting overthrow of regime in Libya, something like that. United States also have same mentality that we don't want to compensate their behavior. They've been cheating us. We have been compensating the bad behavior again and again. We are buying the same horse again and again. Skepticism over North Korea. So that was preventing the negotiation. And finally, again, as I described, the discontinuity of the policy. Like Bill Clinton, his policy was discontinued by George W. Bush. South Korean president's policy was discontinued by Lee Myung-bak, Park Geun-hye. So North Korea, of course, there is one regime going on, but Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il had a stroke succession process. So it is much more inward looking rather than diplomacy. So all those intervention of diplomatic discontinuity, domestic political changes, all those things were making it very difficult to solve the North Korean issue, because it will take some time and very focused, committed diplomacy and negotiation to reach into some agreement and finally achieve the goal.
Then I know that there's a lot of information every day. You know, we write like an article about Korea situation, and then the next day, almost like you have to tweet because things change all the time. And so this time, you know, we talked about those two nuclear crises that we experienced. Why did Chairman Kim Jong-un start negotiation with Trump at this moment? I think people might be very interested in just the timing of and discerning why this is happening now.
Yep. So we are now moving into much more contemporary issues. Like after I bombing you with all the historical information, now we are moving into much more interesting parts. Like I said, domestic political changes in South Korea and United States, and some situation in North Korea, especially, South Korea and the United States. We have some interesting situation. Like sometimes, for example, Bill Clinton had a president of South Korea, which is Kim Young-sam, who was relatively conservative in North Korea. When Bill Clinton was negotiating with North Korea, and Kim Dae-jung came in, and Bill Clinton and Kim Dae-jung was having very good chemistry, but all of a sudden George Bush came in, and they didn't get along very well. George Bush was skeptical to North Korea, Kim Jong-il, as well as he was also skeptical about what Kim Dae-jung was doing to North Korea. So he was not a big fan of Sunshine Policy. So Kim Dae-jung and his successor, Roh Moo-hyun, had George W. Bush as a partner, and they have hard time convincing George W. Bush to support South Korean version of Sunshine Policy. And interestingly, George Bush is gone, and Obama came in, and Obama, liberal president, came in, and in South Korea, Lee Myung-bak, conservative president, came in. So again, why do we always have bad matching system in South Korea and the United States? So again, Obama was having a hard time. It is many people were asking why Obama didn't achieve anything in North Korea. Interesting, Obama, when he was a candidate, a presidential candidate, he always talked about sitting with any low leaders in a table and negotiating. He was not afraid of starting negotiation, but he didn't do anything, he didn't achieve a lot in terms of North Korea. And his policy is called strategic patience. What does that mean? Basically neglecting North Korea. So why it is very difficult for Obama to achieve anything in North Korea? First, Again, in the South, Lee Myung-bak was not really enthusiastic about negotiating with North Korea. Domestically in the United States, of course, Obama trying to do something about North Korea. Of course, he is an appeaser and he is a communist sympathizer. So, of course, liberal president is always under criticism from conservative Republican Party members in terms of pursuing any diplomatic negotiation, right? In North Korea, Kim Jong-un came in, and from 2012, he was in power. Of course, he was more focused on domestic political consolidation rather than negotiation, because he is in his 20s and he didn't have like a lot of political power other than being the grandson of Kim Il-sung and son of Kim Jong-il. So he had to prove himself, right? So he was trying many different things like economic reform policy and just like purging a lot of generals, and he was even purging the husband of his own aunt, Jang Sung-taek, who became too powerful. He was actually in charge of North Korea-China trade and diplomacy. So Kim Jong-un had to remove him from the rivalry. So Kim Jong-un was doing a lot of purgings and he was consolidating his power. So unfortunately, Obama didn't have a lot of political capital to pursue negotiation, and North Korea and South Korea and domestic situation did not allow him a lot of rooms to maneuver in terms of negotiation with North Korea. So Obama is gone, and he was much more focused on Iran and Cuba, as you know. And at this moment, why Kim Jong-un and President Trump and President Moon Jae-in in the South are seeking negotiation. First, Kim Jong-un, there are multiple factors contributing to this kinds of diplomatic momentum. First, Kim Jong-un's side, for 6 years, he consolidated his power. So he was really straightforward in testing nuclear weapons and missiles, even much more focused efforts, even more than his own father. So he conducted several missile and nuclear tests, and he even declared that it is completed. So they completed some of the nuclear bombs and hydrogen bombs and smaller scale weapons that you can mount on top of ICBM. So he actually believed that he might be thinking that now we can negotiate out of strength. We have a bigger bargaining chip. So the United States will not be able to neglect us after we having much better capability of nuclear weapons. And at the same time, he was really consolidating his power. So there's nobody who can criticize Kim Jong-un for seeking negotiation with the United States, because there's nobody who can challenge him at this moment. And that is one side. And how about President Trump? President Trump, as you know, he is in a little bit of difficult domestic political situation, right? There is Mueller investigation going on, and there is some discussion of sex scandal against him, and therefore he had to achieve something, as you know, midterm election is coming, so he at least have to have some success to get some credits. And of course, he is interesting figure. He never served in the public position before he became a president, but he is very unorthodox president. So some people even said that he doesn't even like to be briefed by his office. His staffs. He doesn't even like to read. Maybe, I don't know. So he is very unconventional. So he is not interesting. He's not constrained by the traditional, typical diplomatic protocols of U.S. diplomacy. Of course, the U.S. president is actually constrained by many of the bureaucracy and organizations and opposition party, Congress, and all that. But interestingly, President Trump is not a person who is really caring about all those factors, and he is very basically pursuing what he wants. So, for example, it is very unusual for any U.S. president directly meeting North Korean leaders without any lower ranking like high-ranking official discussions, official negotiations. So it is very unusual. So the unique character of President Trump enabled this unusual situation. So, yep, and of course, if President Obama is doing this, of course, he's an appeaser and he's North Korean sympathizer, he's a weak and all that. If Trump is doing it, his supporters will be like very much happy. Like they will be supporting President Trump. And of course, like some times ago, President Trump was visiting Michigan for a rally, and his supporters are like chanting like Nobel, Nobel, Nobel. Like President Trump is thinking that he is going to get the Nobel Peace Prize if it is successful. Again, President Trump's policy is something like ABO, anything but Obama, right? So Obama didn't do anything in North Korea, so I'm going to do that. Obama did something in Iran, so I'm going to, just like give it up or something, right? So somehow, like these kinds of domestic factors in the United States and President Trump's unique character enable it. At the same time, we shouldn't neglect the role of South Korean President Moon Jae-in, who is a great negotiator. Like he made it very clear that South Korea is not seeking absorption of North Korea or collapsing down of North Korea or any military confrontation with North Korea, which is very much resumption of sunshine policy, because two of his conservative predecessors, Lee Myung-bak and Park Geun-hye, they were basically collapsists, waiting for North Korea to collapse down, and they were very much sanctioned and squeezing North Korea. It didn't achieve anything. But at the same time, those two presidents are actually in prison right now because of their corruption charges. And of course, Park Geun-hye was impeached after candlelight demonstration, very peaceful democratic movement, just accusing her for her corruption charges. So she was finally impeached by Congress and Constitutional Court, and new election, and Moon Jae-in came in. So he was pretty much supported by general public of South Korea, and he was maintaining 80% approval rate for 1 year, which is pretty much unprecedented. So he has strong backup from South Korea. So like again, conservative used to criticize liberal president as again North Korea sympathizer and of course weak or appeasing. But Moon Jae-in was having strong political capital at this moment, and he was relatively consistent in pursuing negotiation with North Korea. So as you know, Pyeongchang Winter Olympic became a great momentum for these kinds of peace negotiation. And of course, North Korea and South Korea exchanged their artists and singers for cultural exchange. And it was melting down some of the almost like 10 years of confrontation under the conservative government. And of course, we recently had a very successful one-day Inter-Korea summit in April. And they were like basically Kim Jong-un crossed the border and had a meeting with President Moon Jae-in, and they were very much respectful toward each other, and they expressed a lot of positive attitudes and like optimism about like the peace, the possibility of peace and cooperation. And in their statement, both agreed upon some of the comments like South Korea and North Korea acknowledged and support North Korea's active efforts for complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. So complete denuclearization, which is actually resonating the CVID, like which has been very important goal from the U.S. administration. Complete, very verifiable, irresponsible destruction. So those are the factors contributing to the great momentum at this moment. I'm actually answering the next question together, like question number 5. So yeah, so yep, that is the momentum. But we have some optimistic factors and some concerns So maybe I will just move on to the next question and talk about that. So the reason I am relatively optimistic this time is first, both of the leaders, North Korean and South Korean leaders, are talking about, again, ending the Korean War. So in the past, United States was always talking about peace treaty and ending the Korean War, diplomatic normalization as a final stage of negotiation. But this time, Inter-Korea Summit, they talk about peace treaty and ending the Korean War, at the initial stage of negotiation. So basically, I think it is touching the root causes, like why North Korea developed nuclear weapons. Some of the conservative position against North Korea has been like asking CVID first, and we will compensate you with, we will consider giving you negotiation, diplomatic normalization and peace treaty. The problem is, what if North Korea give up their nuclear weapons and United States didn't like respect the deal? Like North Korea can be like Iraq or Libya. So of course, it will be very much difficult decision for North Korea to like pursue unconditional surrender first, like the United States asks. So of course, we have to move it together, action by action, and we have to be very skillful in solving the problem. But again, North Korea and South Korea are talking about ending the war. The second, they are talking about a lot of possibility of economic cooperation. So South Korea, I mean, like again, there is, I mean, the goal of nuclear weapons is guaranteeing their security. But again, there is an alternative way of guaranteeing their security. For example, what if we have Trump Tower in Pyongyang? I mean, this is like funny. I mean, it's like, I mean, interesting sauce. But if you have McDonald's and Trump Tower in Pyongyang or Coca-Cola factory in Pyongyang, it will be very difficult for the United States to bomb North Korea because the United States will not bomb American companies, right? So somehow, like South Korea and North Korea talk about resuming economic cooperation and reconnecting the railways between the North and South. So President Moon Jae-in, declared some of the ambitious project called H-shaped economic belt, basically connecting the East Coast and West Coast of the Korean Peninsula together and pursuing some economic cooperation and building a more economic industrial complex like Kaesong Industrial Complex, several places in North Korea. And the eastern side, like the eastern side of the railway will be connected to Russia, and the western side of the railway will be connected to China. So what does that mean? So it is not just inter-Korea economic cooperation, but connecting North Korean economy with China and Russia. So all those neighboring countries, even Japan, all those neighboring countries, even the United States, will be investing in North Korea and starting some economic cooperations and starting production in North Korea, taking advantage of North Korean resources and cheap labor in North Korea, combining it with South Korean capital and technology, and of course the same thing with a neighboring country. So if you are providing some of the guarantee, security guarantee, the neighboring country in the form of six-party talk or something, and inter-Korea, the U.S. North Korea corporations providing some of the diplomatic guarantee, combined with ending the Korean War, and combining with economic cooperation and investment, North Korea might feel much safer about, much comfortable, easier to give up their nuclear weapons, right? The question is, again, we had something similar in Iran. Like, it is not just the United States, but like UK, France, Russia, and Germany and France, they all participate in guaranteeing some of the deal with Iran under Obama administration. And of course, President Trump is trying to pull out from such a deal. So again, North Korea still have some concern. What if we have a deal, but the new president of the United States will not honor some of the diplomatic negotiation, and you already gave up nuclear weapons. So again, that is again fundamental dilemma of North Korea. But again, at this moment, we have again, South Korea as a mediator, and Moon Jae-in will be at least serving 3 more years, and he was pretty much supported. So again, we have good momentum in general, right? The CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible destruction, dismantling of nuclear weapons, should be combined with CVIG. A lot of people nowadays talk about CVIG, complete, verifiable, irreversible guarantee of North Korean survival. So again, without addressing North Korean issue, their concern for their survival, you will lose this deal. So this is great opportunity because it seems like all the stars are aligned together in the right way at this moment. This is good. I mean, like we have like probably the last windows of opportunity to solve this problem for good. So because again, Moon Jae-in, Kim Jong-un, President Trump, they're all willing to negotiate. It is, I mean, when you talk to most of experts on Korean Peninsula issue, majority of them are still skeptical because again, we tried several things in the past and it didn't work out in the end. But again, we can be still optimistic and we can still try. Especially at this moment, something great is President Trump is pursuing something, some kinds of package deal in a short term because it is long-term process. It is always like another domestic political changes in one of the country, like breaking down the deal. So if we can achieve some kind of short-term deal that will make these kinds of negotiation process irreversible and move forward in achieving major breakthrough, we still have some good chance. Again, what will be the problem? Like, again, how can you trust each other? Like, again, like there is some possibility of any of the U.S. like politicians, negotiator asking something North Korea cannot accept, unlimited special inspection to their sites or permanent. I mean, they usually these days they talk about PBID, permanent, verifiable, irreversible dismantlement. What does that mean when you talk about permanent? Like again, John Barton, he also talked about not just nuclear weapons and conventional weapons, dismantling of the convention. How can North Korea accept such a strong demand? So again, there's very easy way to torpedo and destroy the negotiation. You can basically asking something they cannot accept. So I mean, it will be breaking down. So there's some possibility of some of the officials in the United States, like for example, like after inter-Korea summit meeting, the stock price of military industrial complex in the United States and South Korea, they dropped. Yeah, so there is some people who might be concerned about these kinds of peace rather than confrontation. Of course, there is another opportunity opened. Like for example, some of the railway companies, like something like the construction companies, they have a huge increase in their stock price in South Korea. So again, if South Korean people in the United States, even thinking out of purely national interest perspective, if they think like it is our national interest to open up North Korea, starting investment and like turning North Korea into new China or Vietnam, that would be great. If United States officials find that as a better better alternative than having North Korea as a threat and just keep selling weapons to Asian countries and preparing for the Cold War against China. Again, there are dangers and opportunities. So that is pretty much the brief overview of what is happening.
Wow. I'm still stuck with the Trump Tower in Pyongyang.
Yeah.
That takes some imagination, and I really don't know how to process that.
Yeah.
But there's definitely, this is the time for some imagination and some creative ways to resolve this. And for you to just even bring up this economic belt, this connection as a Korean Peninsula, connecting the different parts of the world in Northeast Asia, what that could be, and to imagine something completely different like that is hopeful. All of us know as people who pursue peace in the world as faith, people of faith, this whole process of reconciliation is so fragile. And Dr. Lee, it's just very inspiring to know that you know all of these complexities and yet you stay hopeful, that you hold this time that we have, like you said, all the stars are aligned.
Right.
And it's just, it's powerful to imagine that perhaps for such a time that we can hope. What can we do? Because this is such a big, complex problem.
Right.
And, you know, the US, as Americans, this is not something that's out there. We've been involved in putting, you know, that divisive line in Korea. What can we do here as people of faith, as people who pursue peace? What can we do here now?
Yeah, that is interesting, important questions, especially as a Christian, we can do a lot. Like first, we can start to pray. That's what most of you are doing. And if you're praying, it always leads you into some kinds of actions, like reading. I mean, if you're praying for something, you are paying attention to that. Like you are reading about it, you are studying it, you are talking about it, you are promoting some awareness about it. So you can talk to other people, especially we are living in a democratic society. Like we are choosing our own leaders and we are deciding our foreign policy, domestic policies. So somehow you can talk to your representative, you can make a phone call, you can write a letter. For example, some of the American politicians are very like comfortable about talking about the war. Like that will cause hundreds, thousands of people death. Like so, like for example, Senator Lindsey Graham, he said like I've been coping with President Trump, and he will start the war if North Korea is not stopping nuclear test or missile test or something. If we have a war, people will be dying there rather than here. And how can you say that? I mean, as a senator of the United States, you are gambling with the life of million people, and it is not just Korean people. It is like some hundreds, thousands of American people living in South Korea, and some thousands of American soldiers deploying. Most of them will be killed. So of course, again, it is not just the issue of life and death in South Korea. Again, like some times ago, you have a false alarm in Hawaii. Do you remember that? Like everybody got a text that you just have 30 minutes. What does that mean? Like, what if President Trump got the wrong signal and order to fire something against North Korea, even if it is did anybody watch the movie Rogue One, the new, like it is not actually new, but like a Star Wars movie. At the end of the movie, there was like some kind of nuclear attacks like in the ocean. Like we don't want that in the United States, but it can happen. Like nuclear war is not impossible. Like you remember like the two leaders talking about, I got a bigger button, it is working and something like that, which is crazy, right? Because you are dealing with real people and lives of millions of people, right? So you can actually talk about peace, and you can, like if you're really pro-life, like, yeah, you have to think about like peace, because the stakes are too high. Millions of people will be just disappearing. Like millions of people were killed, at least 3 million people were killed in Korean War 1950 with conventional weapons only. Like what is going to happen in the Korean War? Another Korean War in the Korean Peninsula with all the chemical, like biological and nuclear weapons. So it is unimaginable, right? And like I think it is important to think about like perspective. Like when you actually look at all those policy issues behind it, underneath it, there is some issue with a simplistic understanding of good and evil. Like again, I mean, North Korean issue, human rights abuses, like dictatorship, those are evil, but war and the hatred and division and confrontation, those are also evil. like evil, you have different kinds of forms of evil, right? I mean, the sense of we are better than you is also evil, right? Yeah, so like you have to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes to understand that. So we need more empathy and we need more understanding historical backgrounds. Again, not many American people understand what was happening in the Korean War and like almost like half a century in the Korean Peninsula. So again, study, like learn and discuss it. And I mean, do not claim I am better than anybody else. Like for example, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who used to be in concentration camp in Soviet Union, he said, the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. He didn't say that the line is dividing United States and Soviet Union or something. So we are all imperfect human beings. Like, is there any good people in North Korea? Is there any nice things in North Korea? Of course, yes, right? I mean, communist China, like before they start economic reform, it was pretty much like North Korea. Like Vietnam, before economic reform, diplomatic normalization, it was pretty much like North Korea. Like some people believe that North Korea, there's no chance of changing at all. I mean, I don't think so. Like North Korea can be new China, North Korea can be new Vietnam. But interestingly, United States normalized the relationship with China and Vietnam before they change. When United States normalized the relationship with China, it was Mao Zedong, like who pursued cultural revolution. He was a dictator, and I mean he killed a lot of people, and they developed nuclear weapon in 1960s. But 1971, Nixon visited China, and China of today is much better than China in 1960s. I don't think it is impossible for North Korea. So just have some imagination and try something. Some years ago, there was ladies who are crossing, like who was doing some kind of campaign, like Pastor Sue, you might know them, women crossing the 38th parallel. I mean, a lot of politicians were skeptical about what they're doing, but I think it is very symbolic. Like they are really emphasizing the importance of peace. What is the reason we cannot end the Korean War? I mean, it has been almost like 60 years. Like, what is the point of continuing the war? I mean, so you have to replace the truce treaty agreement with peace treaty. Like, so we don't want to use it as some kind of bargaining chip because peace treaty is something we can do right now, right?
Absolutely. Dr. Lee, we have some questions. I think, right. Janie, would you share some of the questions that have been shared?
Sure. I saw some questions from Steve and from Gwen. So maybe if Steve wants to go first, if you want to name a question that you have, just one question, and then we'll go to Gwen.
Well, mine wasn't a question so much as a comment. Just frankly, as an American citizen, I'm so aggrieved every day by my president, our president. Mm-hmm. So it's very hard to get my mind around the idea of President Trump doing something positive. Mm-hmm. So yeah. Day after day, I wake up to news that just disgusts me. So the thought of President Trump meeting in North Korea, which I understand from today's news is something now is in question because of our military exercises over there. But, it's just so difficult to wrap my mind around as a person mm-hmm. who believes in peace. Could a man who I think is so contrary do something good?
Right.
So it did make, you mentioned Nixon in China. So it did make me think that, that was an impossible moment. Or it seemed like, the thought of Nixon in China was absurd. Mm-hmm. So I'm just making a comment that perhaps this could be, if I try to be as hopeful as I can, a Nixon-China kind of moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
So no question, really.
Yeah, thank you.
Gwen, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it piggybacks on Steve's. We had some interesting conversation with some Korean students here. And part of our question was, would Korea, both North and South, be better off without the U.S. involved in this resolution at all? Could they come to their own resolution without the U.S.? And the students were saying something about the post-Korean War, the rights of South Koreans were somehow taken over by the U.S. and rights of North Korea were taken over by Russia.
Soviet Union.
In order to about in terms of who had the authority to come to a place of peacemaking or agreement. Does that sound right? So the question is, could just North and South Korea solve this more helpfully without the United States involved?
It is very difficult. Of course, some of the Korean people wanted to handle the issues by themselves. The problem is the Korean War. I mean, you have to go back to the Korean War to start this process, because that is the last momentum we stopped. Especially Korean War ended with peace. I mean, without peace treaty and with a truce agreement that was signed by China, North Korea, and the United States. South Korean president at that moment, he was unhappy about ending the war because he was relatively unrealistic in just like keep fighting North Korea to unify the country. Of course, he was relatively unrealistic in many ways. So he was not even there. So again, it was international war. The Korean War was an international war, and unfortunately, China and the United States were signatory of the treaty. So North Korea was basically felt threatened by the United States, not necessarily by just South Korea. So the survivor of North Korea, of course, South Korea providing guarantee to North Korea will sounds great, but it will not make North Korea comfortable about their survivor, because the main source of threat is coming from United States to North Korea and North Korea to the United States. So somehow we need some breakthrough in North Korea-US relations. So yeah, after that, probably two Koreas will be much more active in pursuing their economic cooperations and all that. Like Germany, of course, West Germany was heavily dependent on United States in terms of their defense. Of course, unified Germany at this moment, it is much more independent, right? So the Cold War is ending, right? So probably that will be the situation, but we have to solve the problem. Like we have to do our homework, achieving some of the peace treaty and diplomatic normalization and denuclearization among United States, North Korea, South Korea, and probably with China.
I think we had one more question. Who's the username lapdogair?
Oh, that's Rose.
Oh, Rose. Okay. Rose, you had a question about churches in Korea. Do you want to ask yours?
Yeah, my question was just about whether how churches and the peace movement in Korea, in South Korea, are interpreting these moments, and what are they supporting, and how might churches and peace movements in the U.S. align with what they are asking for?
Basically, very much affected by American Christianity. So you have some conservative and evangelical churches in South who are pretty conservative. So they are relatively cautious about doing anything with North Korea, and they're very critical about North Korean human rights issues and the dictatorship and the nuclear development. They are more skeptical about North Korea. And liberal churches and progressive churches, of course, Christians, they are much more willing to negotiate with the North, and they are much more focused on peace and reconciliation. So you have like two different kinds of forces like competing each other, and they're pretty divided politically, ideologically, in their theological understanding of the issue. But again, at this moment, many Koreans, again, after the Inter-Korea Summit meeting, almost like some surveys show that more than 90% of the Korean people endorsed and supported the deal, that it was the right thing, it was the great thing. So at this moment, we have very good momentum in Korea, in South Korea, and they were very much concerned about, like, again, whether they like President Trump or not. At this moment, they are really cheering for President Trump because, again, interesting, liberal President Obama didn't do almost like anything, but interesting, conservative President Trump, he is willing to do something unprecedented, like at least meeting with Kim Jong-un. So like there's some like joke that like among South Korean people, like we are like recommending President Trump for like Nobel Peace Prize. Yeah, he can take the Nobel Peace Prize and we will have peace, right? So somehow there's like strong support for like the peace and negotiation at this moment. So interestingly, something good come out the bad things, and something bad can come out of good things. So it is an irony. Like again, your personality matter, your personal position matter as a president or leader, but sometimes it is not always consistent. What you are doing is like we have a lot of contingency, coincidence, and I mean probably this is interesting situation, but we have at least some great momentum, and we are wishing for something good come out this kinds of diplomatic efforts.
I'd like to add to what Inyeop said. Rose, I will be in Korea. I will actually be in Kyoto, Japan, at the end of this month for a Northeast Asia forum, Christian Forum for Reconciliation, and that's exactly what we will be hearing. There will be a panel from a Catholic perspective of how they're responding to what's happening in Korea, as well as from more progressive, peace-focused churches. They'll be giving a presentation. And so I will try to do my best to, I'm part of that panel. They want to know what's happening, how we're responding here as peace churches in the US. And so I will try to give you some updates from that finding when I come back.
So, like, thank you very much for paying attention to my lengthy discussion of complex issue. And if you are again interested in, this is my book. You can search this book with my name in Amazon.com or something. And my email address is like my private email address is godnation, godnation@gmail.com. So feel free to ask me any questions or like send me any feedbacks. That will be really appreciated. And let's keep in touch. You can find me in the Facebook. If you're in the LA area, 19th of May, I will be there and speaking in 10 a.m. Probably with the same issue. So you'll be welcome to be there. Right.
Man, you're doing my job. Thank you for doing that. Also, if you want to know how you can take action, we also, again, this month we are campaigning. If you plug into MennoniteUSA.org/Korea, there's a lot of information. This is a unique collaboration in that a lot of Mennonite organizations have come together. So we've been working with Mennonite Central Committee, MCC, as well as Mennonite Mission Network, so that we have awesome blogs, like stories of reflection from people on the ground. We have Joy Yoon, who has lived inside North Korea for 10 years. We just released a Peace Lab podcast with Joy Yoon, which I will be sharing on my Facebook. And for our supporters of reconciliation, it's a 16-minute kind of a talk with Joy, and it's fantastic. We also are trying to advocate or to really encourage churches to pray for Korea on May 20th. And so that also, the prayer that we're praying together, it's called Prayer for Peace in North Korea. There's a video, so you can show that, produced by MCC. There's a lot of resources that are there. And lastly, as Inyeop said, on the 19th, Reconciliation is hosting Dr. Lee, as well as Dr. Barnabas Park and Taeyong An. to talk more about, in person. You'll get to meet him in person, and perhaps even Dr. Lee, a lot of people are wanting to get your books. So if you bring some along, you might be able to sell that as well, because we need to understand what's happening before we take action or make comments. Thank you so much for your time. I know we went a little overboard, a little over time, but so appreciate every one of you that have come to this webinar. This is being recorded, and so we will share the link after it is recorded so that you can listen to it again, or to share it with those who might be interested in what we've talked about. We're trying to gather resources so that we could really have a complete and, a breadth of knowledge that Dr. Lee has also shared with us. That's about it. We thank you, friends, new friends and old, who have been walking with us. God bless you, and may we continue to pray for peace in this region as well as around the world. Thank you, friends.
Thank you.